employees, and we've got one of the largest water resources groups in Nebraska, anyways, with 19 folks, engineers. I'm the only non-engineer in that group, so that always gets interesting. Well, then we have a good time doing what we do. So I think everyone probably knows what a watershed plan is. The watershed planning process based on the boundaries of a drainage area or a watershed area. That's kind of the confines of what we're talking about today. But it's more than just a document, it's also a process. It's how you go about doing what you're doing. So, quick overview of Nebraska resources. This is actually an old postcard from Valentine, Nebraska, where I'm from. Part of the Sandhills, and that's the Niobrara River flowing through there. Putting this together, I've got a lot of pictures of Nebraska here. I almost felt like a tourist slideshow. Pretty proud of the state. We have a lot of cool water resources there. So I'm sure everyone's familiar with the 100th meridian. Crosses Nebraska almost right down the center. It's kind of the beginning of where the west begins, where rainfall starts at more of a deficit. It's harder to raise crops, grow food and fuel. So irrigation becomes an important part of it. We see a huge change across the state from eastern Nebraska to western Nebraska. And the amount of rainfall we get, 35 some inches in the east and less than 15 inches out in the western panhandle. So it creates a very diverse state. We'll see that as we look at the topography of the state. Eastern portion of the state is primarily formed with glaciers. And then we have kind of the plains, the prairie, that's all from Luss, essentially. And then the Sandhills in Nebraska are about a third of the state. This big area out here is all ranch country, it's all grass. Stabilized sand dunes, the largest group of sand dunes in North America. And then the western Nebraska, the panhandle, where it gets even drier. The Platte River comes in from Colorado and Wyoming and flows through the state. It's kind of, I would say, one of the iconic pieces of water resources in the state. Mile wide, an inch deep. The Niobrara River flows all across the northern state. Valentine's right up where I'm from, so we tell everyone we're the heart of the Sandhills. We're also kind of the main jumping off point to the Niobrara River, which is a national scenic river. So a quick few pictures. We're not, like I said, we're not just a plain state. That's out in the western Nebraska, the panhandle. And we got the Sandhills in Nebraska, stabilized sand dunes, all covered in grass, ranch country. This is the Platte River in eastern Nebraska, wide, not deep, very shallow river. Sand bars dominate the landscape through there. And this is actually the source of drinking water for the vast majority of the population of the state. With Omaha, we get their drinking water from the aquifer under the river. And then we've also got a few waterfalls. This is the state's largest. Smith Falls, that's up near Valentine as well. Just off the Niobrara River, it's 63 feet tall. So we've got a few more things going on than just rolling hills and corn. This is the land use of the state. You see all the green is essentially corn, soybean, typical row crop agriculture. Out in the Sandhills, you see it's all grass covered, and you can see a lot of grass out in the western part of the state, a little bit different grasses between the two. And then you can see the river valleys that crisscross the state. Elkhorn comes out from northeast Nebraska, and then the Loop River system flows actually out of the Sandhills. The groundwater, that's probably one of our most important, if not most important, natural resources in the state. It really makes life possible. It's the vast majority of our agriculture and irrigation is driven by it. 85% of the state population is a source of drinking water from that. And if you take away the water intake from the Missouri River from Omaha, which gets part of their water from there, it's closer to probably 99% of the population. So groundwater is a huge component of what we deal with there. Number one irrigated state by acres. And we've got the High Plains Aquifer covers most of the state, the Oglala Aquifer, which most people know it as. We have a lot of other aquifer regions. Along the major rivers, we have some of the valleys and the alluvial aquifers. In the eastern part of the state, where it's been glaciated, we have a lot of disconnected aquifers, small pockets of aquifers. It's harder to find water there. So some of the issues we deal with in the state, there's quite a bit given our different topography and our rainfall differences from east to west. But we deal with some of the classic water quality issues, blue-green algae blooms, E. coli bacteria in the streams, erosion in our fields, erosion in our urban areas, and then all that washes down into lakes. We dredge those out, we have those, we deal with the issues of sediment, and then stream channelizations and changes in the streams. It's kind of those typical classic water quality issues. And this is just a quick map. The Department of Environmental Quality does the integrated report every year. They do stream monitoring, lake monitoring, and look at the water quality issues across the state. Basically, anything that's red or orange has some sort of issue in the state, and that monitoring is really done on a limited basis even. So I think it's just a snapshot of what's going on. So we deal with nutrients, nitrogen, and phosphorus. I like to think that kind of the issues we deal with nitrogen are a little bit different than what Iowa has. We all know about the Gulf hypoxia and nutrients coming out of the Midwest. So Iowa, my mind, what I know anyways, is they deal with a lot of the runoff of nitrogen, whether it's through drain tile or direct runoff from farm sites. We deal with a lot of nitrate leaching into our groundwater. Our groundwater is typically 100, 150 feet deep in a lot of areas, and it's way down there. But because it's such an important source of drinking water, the nitrates in our drinking water is really the main issue. You don't see as much runoff of the nitrates. I think a lot of that's due to the irrigation that we see out there. It helps push those nitrates down. And the lack of rainfall helps keep them from washing away their rains. So that's really a big difference in how we manage that. We deal with both flooding and drought. We went to Nebraska and southeast Nebraska. A couple years ago, they had a good flood. We see it in lots of other places. Platte River in 2012, I think everyone knows what a major drought that, but we deal with both issues all across the state. And quick fact, the National Drought Mitigation Center, that's based out of the University of Nebraska in Lincoln. So they've been a great resource. We work with them on hazard mitigation planning and drought planning as well. But I always thought it was kind of interesting to face that. We deal with wildfires in Nebraska. This is an area in the Pine Ridge of Nebraska and out in the Panhandle. We see wildfires out there. We see wildfires in a lot of places in the state. But the issue is really the hydrology in that burnt landscape after the fact. The soils become hydrophobic. Water runs off and erodes away the topsoil, the topsoil that's there, creating sediment and issues downstream, changing that landscape until it can recover. And the fires are getting bigger and more often. This is from 1964 to 2012, the amount of acres burned in the state have gone up significantly. So that's another issue key to the road to deal with. The groundwater irrigation, like I said, we're one of the most irrigated states in the country. It's a huge piece of what we do. So this is just a map of the density of irrigation wells in the state. We see a lot along the Platte River, a lot in this south central area of the state. It's the Blue River Basin area. Northeast Nebraska sees a lot. And there's still a fair number as you go west, but it's a little bit harder to grow some crops, so you won't see it in the prime areas. And then the Sandhills is relatively bare irrigation wells. There's a lot of water there. It's the deepest part of the highlands aquifer because of the soils and topography there. So they actually end up exporting a lot of the water to the eastern part of the state because of streams drain out of there. But you'll see with that, it kind of overlays pretty nicely with some of our groundwater nitrate contaminated areas. Along the Platte River, it's the sandy soils, lots of irrigation that pushes the nitrates down. A lot of irrigation in some of these other areas helps push the nitrates down. So you see a pretty close correlation in those practices. And then a lot of that pumping also leads to issues in the streams of water quality. So you see a map of the state in 1940 or earlier, pretty limited wells, mainly just along the alluvial systems with groundwater was shallower. Since then, the state's basically covered in wells and irrigated practices. So we've seen a change in the hydrology of a lot of our streams where those wells are intercepting the water that would have normally contributed to the base flows of those rivers. So not only do you see an impact kind of on a yearly annual basis, but during any sort of drought period, it's stressed even harder on the system. And of course, we have surface water irrigation. A lot of this was installed prior to some of the high-capacity wells and drilling techniques they had in the second half of the century. But western Nebraska, even down along the loops, there's some, and then south of the Platte, you see quite a bit too on most of the river systems. And there's some sort of irrigation, surface irrigation network. And changes in our groundwater system have came into being. Both the wells have done some groundwater mining in some areas, and the surface water has actually recharged some of the aquifers in some areas. So down here south of the Platte, you see these blue areas. That's all basically groundwater mound. There's a small mound up here where there's an irrigation district, another irrigation district a little bit over here. But you also see some of the severe mining out in western Nebraska, where there's a heavy concentration of wells pulling the water out of the aquifer and not getting recharged because of the amounts of rainfall there. And in the Republican Basin as well, you see quite a bit of mining going on there. 40 to 50 feet is some of those red areas of how far the water levels have dropped. So this kind of wide array of different issues and resource challenges going on. Wonder who manages all this. We have a Department of Natural Resources, just like Iowa has the Iowa Department of Natural Resources, except ours really only covers a small sliver of what goes on. We deal with all these other agencies that are in Iowa. They're all wrapped into IDNR. The Department of Environmental Quality deals with some of the groundwater and water quality issues, the surface water. Game and Parks deals with all of our fish and wildlife resources. DHSS runs a lot of the well licensing and some of the water quality standards for drinking water. Department of Agriculture, they have a limited role, but it's based around pesticides and herbicide programs. And then the Department of Natural Resources, or excuse me, the Natural Resource Districts. And I'll talk to those about here a little more. Those deal mainly with groundwater. And of course, we also have our communities, our rural water districts, irrigation districts, federal agencies that all play a role in this as well. This is just kind of a neat little infographic of the framework that we deal with, both with water quantity on this side, water quality on this side, and then surface water up here and groundwater. There's quite a bit of overlap, or I should say. The agencies have to work together a lot to deal with these issues and manage the resources. So natural resource districts, very unique system. Nebraska is the only state that has this. They were formed in the 1970s as there's getting more and more of these special resource districts, levee districts, soil and water conservation districts, drainage districts. All these special districts, the state legislature combine them all into locally run natural resource districts. They've got taxing authority. They're locally elected board is who runs them. And one of the big things is the boundaries are based on river basins. So I don't know if they envisioned it back then, but as we see now with more and more watershed type planning, it really become a natural ally, a natural source to go through some of this planning. There's 23 of them. You see along there's a 5 here along the Central Platte River Basin, the Blue River Basin. I'm in the Lower Platte South Basin, Lincoln is there, and Omaha and Papio. So they're all different. They all deal with a little bit different issues. Which being locally, that was kind of why they had them. Then of course the groundwater focus, they deal with well permitting, groundwater regulations. So some of the different approaches to planning that we've taken. All the different issues that we deal with, there's been probably going to be two main, I guess, approaches that I'll talk about. One just briefly, the other one I'll expand on. So integrated management planning, this really started in 2004. The legislature passed laws that actually recognize the connection between groundwater and surface water. And both scientists, engineers, managers over the years knew they were connected, but they were always managed separately. Two different legal standpoints. Groundwater, through the NRDs, they have the correlative rights, how they're regulated, and the surface water is private appropriation system. So prior to this happening, the surface water and groundwater are regulated separately. If there was an issue with one that impacted the other, it was just kind of too bad for everyone. So now the DNR is required to work with DNRDs in areas that are over-appropriated or fully appropriated. In other words, if they've given out permits for more water than is actually there, or the exact amount of water that's actually there, then they're required to work with the local DNRDs to put these management plans. But these are distinct from the water quality management plans. They focus solely on quantity. And this is the map. Western Nebraska is really where we've seen where it's been fully appropriated and given out more rights, more water use permits than water is available. So all those areas have been required to put together integrated management plans. They've gone through that planning process. seeing some of the eastern districts and eastern basins start doing some of this, even though they don't see that they're over appropriated. They see there's possibility for that. We want to try to go back. So it's the exact same process, but they're not being forced to do it. And the other aspect of all this is the water quality planning. The state's been active for a number of years on this, led by the Department of Environmental Quality primarily, working with other partners, but it's been focused mainly on the surface water, driven by the EPA Section 319 non-point source pollution programming and funding for that. They've adopted the 9 elements of the watershed planning through EPA, but they've really been limited in scope. They focused on just a single lake or maybe a really small watershed. They haven't taken a big holistic approach to anything in these previous plans. And like this says, none of that's necessarily a bad thing until you consider there's limited time to get all these plans done. There's limited funding to continue all this planning. We're just looking at small pieces, and that all boils down to limited fortitude. People aren't going to be willing to put up with this for so much, so long. No one likes to sit through lots of planning exercises, do the same thing over and over. So more recently, they've started planning on a larger scale. This is the largest scale of 1 million acres, 12 to 15 HUC 12s, pretty good sized pieces of land, countywide. They call this the basin-wide planning. You're looking at multiple watersheds, multiple HUC 12s, and you're trying to figure out what's the hot spots. Let's target those areas. Instead of going through and making 12 plans, let's make one plan, get the planning process out of the way, and take a holistic look at it. That also means they're focusing more on long-term implementation now, not just a 2 to 3 year project and they're done and move on. And it's also pulling in more stakeholders, both the diversity of them and as a number of stakeholders as well. You're looking at a larger area, more landowners. Nebraska is 97% private land, so working with these landowners is extremely important. And other federal or state and local agencies. So this is really where the natural resource districts have really stepped up and started playing kind of a leading role in leading these planning efforts. So here's some of the few things that they kind of started to add on to these plans as they've gotten bigger. Stream assessments, looking at aquatic habitat, wetlands, groundwater, which was never really looked at before, and some precision conservation is kind of the leading cutting edge of what they're starting to plan. So we've worked on a few plans. We've used the stream functioning pyramid as we go through a large watershed and identify where the issues are. So looking first at hydrology and hydraulics, and geomorphology, and then ultimately water chemistry and the ecology of the stream. Point being, you can't fix the ecology of the stream if your hydrology has changed significantly or your geomorphology is, your streams are rapids in size, it's straight. You're not going to have ecology, so you fix those things first. Here's a map from the Long Pine Creek watershed plan we've finished a few years ago. We're hoping to implement it now. Where we looked at all the streams in the watershed. This is I think 15 HUC 12s are in this, so it's about 400,000 acre watershed. Multiple streams in it. We looked at all of them through LiDAR, looked at aerial sections. We went to all the stream crossings to kind of get a handle on what's going on with geomorphology. Is it sizing? Is it widening? Is it stable? Is it healthy? What's it doing? And they categorized all those so they could really, if they want to tackle a project, they're not missing something nearby that's either going to impede on that or hurt it down the road. The Brazil groundwater management plan is a plan that DEQ worked on with 4 NRDs in the northeastern part of the state. Focused on high nitrates in the groundwater, 20, 30, 40 milligrams per liter. Groundwater way over the drinking water standard of 10 parts per million. So in 2014, they kicked that off. The unique thing with this, they're able to use 319 funds for this planning exercise, where historically they weren't able to do that with groundwater. So they're able to pull that in. The plan was recently approved. It being the first of its kind of the nation, it took quite a while for them to get it done. But they're working on a lot of good things up there now to start to implement it. So that's been a really cool change. The precision conservation, we worked with the Watershed Creek watershed, which is Saunders County, just west of Omaha, still in eastern Nebraska. We've adopted some of the things we've seen in Iowa and Minnesota and some of these other states going on, trying to import those into Nebraska. Using LiDAR, essentially running that to find the hot spots, find areas that aren't treated, find locations where be a critical location to do a project. And that's been a really fun exercise bringing that in. It's very similar to the agriculture conservation plan. can see the eastern part of the state is pretty well accomplished with their planning or finishing up, but still a lot left in the state. So where do we go from here? How does planning need to change to adapt to these new challenges? And why should we continue to improve it? It's come a long way, so there's been a lot of improvements to it. We want to recognize that true interconnected nature of the resources. That planning that the DNR is doing with the NRDs in over appropriate areas is going on separately from what's happening with the water quality planning. That's one area that we're working on. Both are, in some ways, very similar plans. They both have to do with water resources. They're both based on watershed boundaries. So why go through multiple processes? So what would some of this look like? Multidisciplinary approach, like I said, combining the water quality, quantity, surface water, and groundwater all into one planning process under one plan. Tackle it all at once. Find out where your issues are and do targeting of those. So great emphasis on targeting for success. This is that South Loop watershed. There's 43 Huck 12s in this watershed. You can see we've only highlighted a few where there's major problems. We want to tackle those first, see some success, and then continue moving from there. That helps you avoid that band-aid approach where you're looking at it holistically. And then greater involvement of public and landowners. We've had great success, great turnouts with this. We had a stakeholder group of about 30 people plus public that would show up at most of the meetings, and multiple agencies involved in it. Utilize new planning tools. So better modeling has been one tool we've been using more often on these larger watersheds to get a handle on it. It gets challenging though. I'll talk here in a second because of the data. So better modeling, focusing on the implementable solutions in those targeted areas, tailoring those solutions so you're fitting in with other agencies' goals and objectives, find places where you can work together. You bring in more people, yeah, it can be challenging, but you can also bring more resources to the table. And then adaptive management is something people talk a lot about, but we haven't really seen it implemented really heavily in these. No one wants to keep going back to that planning process, going back and working on it. That's the only way you're going to figure out what works and keep doing it. And making sense of the planning process, it can get challenging for stakeholders and especially for the public and landowners to sit through lots of meetings, especially when you're doing two separate planning processes for really the same resource, tackling different issues. So you need to learn how to engage. Risk communication is a science that we've started, communication science we've started trying to incorporate more into our projects. Science literacy, using technology to reach out to them, whether it's online surveys or interactive meetings with technology. Expanding those stakeholder groups and having a thought-out public involvement is something you really learn the hard way. If you go into a planning process and you're just going to put together a plan and tell the stakeholder what's going on, they're probably not going to accept that. They're going to show up to a meeting and there's no purpose. They're not going to show up again. So thinking that out, how to utilize the resources and time and money you have in the best way possible. Data visualization tools. Let the public see what's going on. Let the stakeholders understand what all these complicated models and water quality numbers mean. This is a cool project that's going on within the whole Platte Basin in Colorado, Wyoming, through Nebraska, called the Platte Basin Time Lapse. There's a lot of projects that are spurring off. The main thing is they've got cameras all throughout the watershed, up in the mountains where the headwaters are, and they're constantly taking a picture every 30 seconds. It's been going on for 3 or 4 years now, I think. So you can see the entire watershed throughout the seasons when it does, how it changes, where the water goes, where it comes from. So that's a really cool project that's happening. So closing thoughts. I think we're getting close to our time, so I'm going to share these with you. There's definitely challenges to expanding this process and doing more with it. Additional guidance is definitely needed from the state agencies, from other federal agencies, from local stakeholders that are involved, so you can utilize these tools in the best manner possible to do it in a coordinated fashion across the state. Nebraska has really limited LiDAR coverage. This is a map that shows the coverage of the state. It's really in the eastern and southern portion of the state where it's concentrated. Still about half the state's left. So using tools like the ACPF, it gets really hard to do without LiDAR. Some of our stream report relies on LiDAR, so without that, it gets tough to use some of these tools. Some of the limited monitoring these are all reasons why planning for rock climbing needs to be involved. In summary, we saw in Nebraska, we have a lot of different issues, a lot of different resources we're trying to manage effectively. I like to say it's a wicked problem. There's a lot of ins and outs. There's not necessarily a straightforward solution or answer. Everyone wants a traditional problem where you go from A to B, you implement your solution, and that's it. It's not always that easy. And the other probably main takeaway is the planning process can involve a lot more than just water quality. You can look at stream flow, you can look at recreation, flood protection, urban drainage issues, whatever really the manager, the manager, the watershed, the city, or the county, whatever their issues are, there's a way to incorporate it. So with that, I think there might be a couple minutes for some questions. My contact information is up here. I also had Justin Vogel, he's our branch manager in our Ankeny office, and he's manning our booth here today, so you can ask any of us any questions you have.
Okay. A couple of quick questions for Adam. We're right up on the time, but if we can take a couple very quickly. We'll start with you in the front.
How do you involve farmers in the planning process, so like from the very beginning?
The best thing we've seen with that is to have a really proactive project manager from the client side, or whoever the project manager is. Someone that wants to get out and talk to them, have meetings, tell them kind of what's at stake, why we're doing this, and then when they actually come to a meeting, make it beneficial to them. We'll talk down to them, give them things that they can understand, get their input. Don't just have one big presentation and that's it. Actually get them involved.
Even like an advisory board project, or different process?
It varies from project to project, but usually they're just kind of on the stakeholder group. So there's usually the local landowners, farmers, ranchers, and then some of the agencies that we put them together so they can essentially keep those in the process.
Okay, maybe one more. Okay.
Kind of had two questions, but one is on the watershed districts, besides the Title 319 funding, how are they funded? And then the other one was with all the people involved from the different state agencies, what do you use as your collaborative platform? I mean, how do you collaborate and work together?
Sure. So the natural resource districts, they have local taxing authority, just like any other local governments. They've got a levy mill that they issue on property taxes. That's how they collect most of their funding. And then there's also other like 319 funded projects.
And that's where their board is elected.
Yeah, they're board elected to manage. They're all politicians. So that's kind of the main funding for that, and then another grant and state funds for certain projects and activities. But having a locally funded entity is highly beneficial because they can sponsor a project and just move forward. And then as far as how do we communicate between everyone and bring them all together, it can be challenging. Everyone's got their own agenda. You work on a long-term planning process and someone leaves and you get a new person in. So I think it's just something that you just have to attend to consistently. Don't just go meeting to meeting. Talk to them, develop relationships with the staff, with the farmers, that are on there, and just talk to them. So you can use email, you can use all other tools, but it really comes down to building a relationship with them.
Okay, let's thank our speaker. A lot of great information.